I'm going to be introducing Paula Healy. Claims to fame, she doesn't own a smartphone. Must feel sort of fashion disabled at that point. Been married for 21 years, once did the London to Brighton bike ride on a hired push bike with no gears. But hopefully this presentation today won't have a similar result. But before that, she'd not been on a bike since she was a child. Completed it, but couldn't walk or sit for a week. Paula's going to talk about electronic media in the brain, rewiring for better or for worse. 3 key points: technology is a good servant, but a bad master. Be aware and think, don't be hooked. Look after your brain and help your children to do the same. Let's welcome Paula Healy.
Okay, hello everybody. Well, I've got 30 minutes. Normally my talks take about 2 hours, so I feel quite frustrated that I can't bore you for longer than 30 minutes. There's a lot of information in the next... Oh, sorry, you want me to stand here? Sorry. I know you've been bombarded with information today, so bear with us, and there's a chance to ask questions at the end. And I do have some handouts as well for you to take away, possibly not enough, but I'm happy to give my email address if anybody wants some extra information. Now, usually I know the sort of audience that I'll be talking to. If I go into schools, I know it's concerned parents, or into a business, I know it's people concerned about employees that mightn't be that productive as a result of excessive screen exposure. But today I didn't know what to expect. So could I just see how many of you have young children, or children that are still at home? Okay, and then on top of that, there'll be some grandchildren, I'd imagine. Anybody with, yeah, okay. So we have a mix. So I hope I've tailored the talk adequately for the audience I have. Okay, so we'll get started. I have 2 screens, so bear with me to change. I am looking at this from a neuroscience perspective. In other words, it's slightly on a tangent from what the main topic of the conference is, but it's still very much connected to do with basically our obsession and our addiction to screens. My original research when I did my master's was in addiction, but I quickly realized that addiction was one of the many problems associated with screen exposure. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking at what happens to us if the primary source of stimulation for our brain is screens, and how this will affect the way we think and also affect our behavior. Now, I didn't coin the phrase weapons of mass distraction, but it's very intelligent, I think. Computers, internet games, mobile phones, TV and films. I will be looking at these and their implication for addiction, attention, and memory impairment, as well as stress. One of the problems that the message isn't getting out there about RF radiation is that these are weapons of mass distraction. People are distracted and addicted, and they don't really want to hear or to listen. So this is why this ties in really well with the main topic of today. At the end, we'll talk about what we can do to increase our mental well-being in this digital age, what we can do to live in a more healthy way, and hopefully we'll have some tips that you can take away with you. And again, like Dr. Evans said earlier, I'm not a Luddite. Unfortunately, when you're the messenger of some truths about some new invention, one of the first accusations is that you're a Luddite, and I couldn't do what I've done to date without using computers. So it's about 2 words of using 3, possibly, productively, intelligently, and consciously. Okay. Another intelligent way of describing what we're going through at the moment is the great human experiment. There's so much science out there about all of this that a whole day wouldn't be enough to talk about my particular topic. So this is me at home with a pile of papers in front of me thinking, how do I reduce this down into 30 minutes? Like was said earlier, this is a very intelligent, useful tool, but it's a very good servant, but a very bad master. So what I'm trying to help us all here today is to manage the technology, or it will manage us. So why should we be concerned about all of this? Oh, sorry, I haven't, I'm changing these slides and not these. So that's a picture of me at home with a pile of science in front of me. And why should we be concerned about all of this? Or this, indeed. Why should this picture bother us? I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the hang of this. Okay, we're on the same page. A Childwise report came out. This was in the newspapers in September 2015. By the age of 7, the average child will have spent what equates to 1 full year in front of screens. At the moment, the newspapers are full of these articles, and you could wonder why we're not paying more of attention. But we as consumers sometimes don't want to hear things that are a little bit inconvenient. Okay, so the brain is one of the most adaptive, is the most adaptive organ in the body. The term neuroplasticity describes this ability to adapt, and our brain changes in accordance with what we do on a regular basis. So what we do repetitively will change us on a neurobiological level, and this then will affect our emotions and our behavior. When we're learning a musical instrument, that repetitive rehearsing is strengthened by neuroplasticity. So that's an example of something, if we do repetitively, we will actually change ourselves on a neurobiological level. So it's a good way of learning and remembering. And the connections between the cells in the brain change as a result. This bit on neuroplasticity normally goes on for a few minutes, so what I've done is put in a picture of a meadow to try and create the picture in your heads of what I mean by neuroplasticity. If we're walking through a meadow and there are pathways that have been laid down by us walking that path several times over, the grass will be trodden down, and that will be a very easy way for us to walk through the meadow. If we want to lay down a new pathway, it takes a little bit more work because the grass has to be trampled down. But it's always easier to follow the pathways that have been trodden before. In other words, what we do regularly is a very easy thing to repeat. And when we want to do something new, it's that little bit harder. So you're laying down pathways in the brain between the neurons or the cells in the brain. I hope the picture of a meadow helps to create that picture in your heads. Neuroplasticity is particularly available in infancy and adolescence, and there's a critical period here for brain growth and for learning, and it continues into the early 20s. But it's not confined to infancy and adolescence. It was thought up until recently that it was, but fortunately we still hold on to it well into our adult lives, except the grass gets a little bit tougher to trample down. Okay, so what are the emerging problems associated with excessive screen time? We are covering the 3 things in blue: addiction, attention deficit, digital dementia, or memory problems. All the others we can't cover today: lower academic performance, obesity, aggressive behavior, electronic insomnia, tiredness, delayed development due to lack of movement and play, and mental illness, which has come up in a Public Health England report recently, and they're putting that down. The increase in mental illness in young children and adolescents, they're putting it down to our digital culture, to use their words. I've put an asterisk by lower academic performance and electronic insomnia, because there are recent papers that have come out, and I found it really interesting that we even need to test that if your children are spending time in their bedrooms on screens, that it's going to lower their academic performance, and that they're going to be tired if they're checking their Facebook at 3 in the morning. But we do need science sometimes to back up what is common sense. Lack of empathy, some more symptoms: undeveloped social skills, impulsivity, decreased ability to self-regulate, undeveloped problem-solving skills, learning difficulties, reduced parent-child contact or connection, and mood disturbance and depleted mental energy. These have all been well researched, but as I say, we're just touching on them today. What's the government doing about it? Well, fortunately, recently, the government have been doing a lot, or it seems they're finally taking notice. The schools minister is in the throes of investigating technology on the effect of technology on pupils' behaviour. So it'd be interesting to see the outcome of that. The Department for Education says children bringing smartphones and tablets to schools are hindering teaching and leading to disruption. Again, all of this only came out in October 2015. Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, wants smartphones banned from the classroom at last. Dr. Evans mentioned this earlier. The Organization for Economic and Cooperation Development, the OECD, have recently published this report in September. And I would suggest anyone here who's concerned about this topic, print this out and maybe take it to your schools. They are saying from their research that computers do not improve pupil results. Students who use computers very frequently at schools get worse results. The results show that there's no appreciable improvements in reading, maths and science in countries that have invested heavily in computers in the classroom. I'll throw in a myth there because some of the advice, profit-driven advice we get from the industry is that children need early exposure to be literate. Well, nowadays computers are so simple and it's so intuitive that we really do not need to be exposing them at a young age. They're designed to be simple because they're all about profit, so it's not in their interest to make it difficult. And I think his name was Alan Eagle, a Google executive, who said, it's like using toothpaste. We make it easy so that we don't have difficulty buying and using. So that is a complete myth that's driven by the industry. The Strategic Society Centre, this is another one that if you're interested, I think you should write down. They're a think tank, the SSC. They have just brought this report out a few weeks ago called the Screened Out Report. And their research found that there's a strong link between increased social networking sites and screen-based media. SBM is screen-based media and social networking sites. There's an association between excessive use of these two things and levels of well-being and happiness in children. It would be a negative association, meaning the more they use these, the less happy or the less well they are. So they are saying they want tech companies to protect young from the dangers of excessive screen exposure. That was in The Guardian October, just a few weeks ago. They want the government to issue national guidelines for the use of these things and for the government to compel tech companies to take responsibility for young people's well-being in relation to excessive screen use and to raise awareness, which is what I'm doing here today. But we can only do so much. I think, if anybody is concerned, they ought to print out these things and take them into your schools or wherever your children are. Okay, so we'll move straight on to addiction. Computer game playing and the internet are now being seen as a behavioral addiction. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and that was reviewed in May 2013. They put this in the appendix for more research, even though there's an absolute huge amount of research out there. In the meantime, there's specialized clinics opening in London, Holland, Korea, actually everywhere in the world. I don't know why I listed the countries, because it's everywhere, to accommodate this new problem. China, Taiwan, Korea accepted the diagnosis in 2012, and they see it as a grave national crisis. China says they have 24 million children thought to be hooked on the internet, and they are now opening all over the country, funded by the Chinese government, military-style boot camps, because for them their biggest worry is that it's affecting their economy. There's a picture of one such boot camp in China. Parents are just dragging their children along and enrolling them. And as I said, these are funded by the government. There's the Capio Nightingale Clinic in London, our very own place where you can take addicted teenagers who have a problem with their screen use. I can't remember the name of the psychiatrist, it's changed recently, who's running that department. The smart revolution, well, smartphones are relatively recent phenomena. And I don't own one, I'm proud to say. The new research associated with them is the same as associated with the internet and computer games, addiction again, and an emotional attachment. The problem is with smartphones is they're so easy. They're a status symbol, and they're a way of escaping, and they also give a high. And they're endless novelty and stimulation. Here's a little cartoon to make light of the whole problem. As you can see, this man is wearing some sort of collar around his head, and he's explaining to the lady it stops him from looking at his phone every few seconds. Even on holiday, we've just come back from holiday, and you would be stunned the amount of kids that are lying by a pool using their smartphones, and they end up with a tan line like that. Okay, so there's a book called Hooked that I bought recently, and I was so shocked when I read it, but I really want to share it briefly with you. Written by this man, Near Isle. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name properly. He is writing the book from his experience working in the tech industry, and it's basically about how to build habit-forming products. And he's writing the book for the industry who want to build or in-build habit-forming behaviors into their products. The hook model is embedded into products very subtly to encourage habit-forming behavior. He doesn't use the word addictive behavior, but of course that's what it is. A quote from him is, "Habit-forming companies link their services to the user's daily routines and emotions. If you're feeling bored, you open Twitter. If you're lonely, you open Facebook. If you have a question on your mind, you go to Google. It's exploiting psychological vulnerability." And this has been given a lot of thought. All of these things haven't just come about by chance. They have some very intelligent behavioral scientists working for them. Another funny cartoon. I'm so not addicted to my smartphone because I have an app that warns me if I'm turning into an addict, and it hasn't gone off yet. There are apps, because now they've caused the problem of addiction or mental illness, and they're now coming up with apps to try and help us. So they cause the problem and they'll now make money out of trying to put it right. So more interesting words from Hooked. I just took some words out. I'd be here all day if I tried to tell you about the book. Triggering opportunities, the habit that you are designing, have an understanding of the user's pain. We are the users. Fear is a powerful internal trigger. Fear of missing out. Have anybody heard about FOMO? And a lot of young people suffer from FOMO, fear of missing out. What reward alleviates the user's pain? Is it fulfilling but leaves them wanting more? Okay, we can't be fulfilled completely. Children and adolescents are vulnerable to this sophisticated marketing designed by psychologists, so they absolutely need parental guidance. Another thing they say is it's hard to get someone to stop using a product that they're using without thinking. And a lot of us do use these products without thinking. And when I say us, I think everybody's included in that, including myself, because these are incredibly mesmerizing tools. If we had more time, we'd have a discussion about our own experiences, but there's an average family at the breakfast table, and you can just reflect on these things for yourself or maybe for your children. And I'll read them out. Do we end up spending longer and longer on our devices? Do we feel in control of this? Does it interfere with our normal functioning, sleep, family, work, academic, social? Withdrawal, do we feel angry or irritable when we're not on a screen? Is it causing problems in our lives? And does our decision to stay on a screen have a negative consequence? Do we find ourselves being secretive about screen use? And do we find ourselves using it without thinking? And just dwell on that. I show this picture, enjoying a day at the beach, to a group of teenagers, and nobody laughed. I waited for the laugh because I think it's really funny, and there was silence, and then it just dawned on me, that's normal. I was so shocked. And I said, do you not find this funny? And they all looked at me blankly, sort of say, what? So we find it funny because we're a little bit older, but that to them is what they've grown up with. They think that's normal. You see this in restaurants. People sitting around a table together, but everybody is partly somewhere else. Okay, so what's happening in our brains when we're interacting with these devices? Well, a thing called dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, is released when you play computer games, when you're sending or receiving texts, and when you're responding to Facebook, Twitter, or even when you're managing an app. And seeking information or buying into things on the internet also gives you a dopamine hit. So what is dopamine, I can hear you asking? Well, it's a brain chemical that was there for evolutionary reasons to help us to eat and procreate and move. So it has a function, a healthy function. But unfortunately, the dopaminergic pathway is hijacked by addiction. And dopamine makes us want. It makes us search, seek out, but we are never ever happy or satisfied with dopamine release, so we keep repeating it. It's stimulated by unpredictability and novelty, and is activated by cues for reward. So you can see how these digital devices play perfectly into dopamine release. A text, email, ping, visual cues release dopamine. Constant dopamine release is exhausting. So anything above what would be assumed as normal is exhausting. And it also inhibits our frontal lobes, and we'll talk more about our frontal lobes later. It controls our behavior, dopamine, and we might think we're making conscious decisions to use these digital devices, but for the most part, it's actually coming from a more primitive part of our brain. I don't know if you saw this back in December 2014. I can't remember his name, but he was playing Candy Crush, this MP, in a committee meeting. You can be sure that dopamine was flooding his frontal cortex and that he wasn't really thinking about what he was doing. I think it's a brilliant picture. This is a very heavy slide, so I apologize in advance. There's about 6 journals gone into this slide, so I had to work very hard to reduce it down to just a couple of paragraphs. Internet addiction disorder and computer game addiction are associated with abnormal brain connections in areas of the brain, I just mentioned the frontal lobes, that are involved in emotional processing, which is empathy, decision-making, impulse control, self-regulation, and planning. Internet addiction and computer game addiction result in changes to the brain structure and a reduction in processing in these extremely important parts of the brain. These set of skills inhabit the frontal lobes and are called executive function, and they're responsible for success in every area of life, with impulse and multitasking control, prioritizing, organizing, working memory, attention, good judgment, and decisions. So this is underactive in internet addicts and computer game addicts. They're the frontal lobes, and they separate us from our animal cousins. So to create a picture of the frontal lobes, I've put this picture of a CEO of a company. It's a supervisory role in the brain. They call it executive function. So when I mention it, you can think of this executive who's our CEO of the brain, and a supervisory role. Okay, I put a man in case anybody thought I was being sexist. So you get the picture. Okay, so what does executive function do? Well, it's twice as important as intelligence. In other words, you can have an IQ who's hitting the roof, but if you don't have a well-functioning executive function of the brain, then you won't have as much success as if you had a well-functioning frontal cortex. It controls impulses and emotions, planning, prioritizing, filtering out distractions, handling novel situations, working memory, resisting temptation, and self-monitoring. You can see the other two there. I don't want to delay this in case we go on too quickly, but I just want to emphasize the importance of those set of skills. Where has it taken us? Well, all sorts of inventions over the years, the steam train, the telephone, the camera, and of course, these. So the question I'm asking is, where are we heading? So we've been too clever by half, but we've gone from upright, and you may laugh at this picture, but there's a lot of young children that have been going to chiropractors and osteopaths with really bad postural problems and neck problems, and it's quite obvious that if you're sitting in front of the screen for most of your time while you're growing, that you will end up eventually looking like this. So Time magazine said in Taiwan, this was in 2015, January, they're now legally obligated to monitor their children's screen time. Again, their economy has been affected. And they've brought in a Youth and Child Welfare Act. I don't know how they're enforcing it, but parents can be fined now if they're not going to keep an eye on their children's screen exposure. It will come here eventually, but you're fighting, as Liz said earlier, a hugely profitable industry that will fight every bit of the way. So we're going to talk about attention and focus, which falls under the executive we talked about earlier, and CEO. There's a thing called cognitive control, and I don't want to bombard you with big words, but to describe what that is, it falls under executive function. It's at the front of the brain again. And it's the ability to self-regulate and see through internal goals, the ability to concentrate, follow instructions, plan ahead, and ignore distractions. It's needed to select, maintain, and update your working memory, and also crucial for learning and remembering. This is always impaired in internet addicts. There's a young boy exercising cognitive control. He's following instructions, planning ahead, he's doing his homework. And cognitive control in childhood is a time for adjustment. It's growing, so it's a time when a child should be doing things to exercise this so that they can have it well formed for adult life. The human attention span is very short, okay? And the ability to process information has limits. Too many sources of information overload our brain and disrupt cognitive control. Computers, iPads, and iPhones are a perfect way of overload and distraction for the brain. And the flicker and the luminance and the color of a screen is really, really virtually impossible for us to ignore if it's in the room whilst you're doing your homework or whatever. So multi-screening erodes our ability to concentrate. Our attention is always drawn to these flickering screens and the inner stimulation, and it's a great source of dopamine and rewards for the brain. We repeat the behavior. We click, we Google, we text, we email, we tweet. And there's a great book called The Shallows by Alan Carr, and he said we've become lab rats, constantly pressing levers for tiny pellets of social or intellectual nourishment. So that's The Shallows by Alan Carr, a really easy book to read. Apparently, we check our phones, the average person, 150 times a day. I found that extraordinary. And it doesn't matter where we are. So we are training our brains for distraction, all of us, not just young people. Multitasking is another area that we need to look at very carefully. The multimedia multitasking, the age of multi-screening. This is quite a normal picture, somebody watching telly, doing his homework and listening to music. It's not very uncommon, but I can assure you that the quality of the homework won't be the same if you're doing this kind of thing. It hyper-arouses the brain, and it can induce mental collapse. Heavy media multitaskers lack self-regulation, and in these heavy media multitaskers, cognitive control is always impaired, it seems. And you know, we saw what we need cognitive control for concentration, planning ahead, and filtering out distractions. It also reduces our IQ and our memory, temporarily reduces your IQ, and learning efficiency in tasks. And it's also linked to reduced executive function. We're going to have to speed along a bit because I think we're running out of time. Don't be fooled, because our brain loves to multitask. You fool yourself into thinking that you're doing extremely well, but actually that's because your brain likes novelty, and it's activating the rewards parts of the brain. But you end up with chronic stress because you're also producing cortisol, and cortisol leaves the brain exhausted and muddled. As well as that, it suppresses your CEO. Dopamine and cortisol suppresses the supervisory part of your brain, and you end up with the lower reptilian part of the brain taking over. What would Steve Jobs do? Well, when he was interviewed a year or so before his death, he was asked if his child or children liked the iPad, and he reacted in quite a shocked way and said, "We are very strict about technology with our children. They don't have one." So basically, the people who are developing this and selling it to us are the wisest when it comes to their children's use. In Silicon Valley, there's a Steiner school that discourages uses of computers in the classroom, and 3/4 of the children there come from the tech industry. So it's time for us to take responsibility and wake up a bit. Digital dementia, I'll have to fly through this, I'm afraid. Working memory and long-term memory. I'm going to skip a few slides and go straight on to this. Digital dementia is on the rise, and this was an article from the Daily Telegraph. I'll read it out to you. This young boy of 15 was taken to a doctor by his mother after he developed symptoms of early onset dementia due to intense exposure to digital technology. His brain's ability to transfer information to long-term memory had been impaired because of his heavy exposure to digital gadgets. This is what his psychiatrist has said. And this has come up again and again and again. It will happen here. All of this is on its way. He had a shortened attention span and reduced memory capacity, and this could lead to early onset dementia. It's a shame I had to exclude the previous slides, but I haven't gone as fast as I thought I would. It would prepare the way better for that particular slide. Look this up. It's the Kaspersky Lab study, 2015. It talks about digital dementia again, and how all of us, we're doing this unconsciously, when information is available from an easily accessible source, we're deliberately forgetting it. It's called the Google effect. Because the intellect lowers us to work things out for ourselves and makes us less self-sufficient, we find ourselves, and I find myself doing that, knowing I can get it at the press of a button, but the consequence of that is a memory that won't be functioning as well as one that is being used more thoroughly. The expression use it or lose it, I'm afraid, is applicable here. So what can we do? Well, we need a focused and a calm brain. That's what we know that we need. So how do we achieve that? Our brain is at its best when it's focused and calm. We need stillness, but this is really hard to come by. We often see this in London nowadays in the parks. People actually are realizing themselves they need stillness. There's an awful lot of research gone into meditation in the last few years, and these are the things they've been finding this meditation helps with. Stress management and self-awareness, happier and healthier, helps focus and concentration, helps with addictive behavior in controlling impulses, helps you notice when you're wasting time, improves emotional intelligence, calms the brain, and achieves clarity of thought. Regular meditators have more grey matter in the frontal lobes and better executive function. So that's one way we can deal with the problem that's coming our way. What else can we do? Well, we can choose carefully what we do in the internet. We have a certain amount of resources when we wake up in the morning in our brain, a certain amount of glucose, and we know that we have to choose carefully what we do on the internet and not burn unnecessary fuel on reading all sorts of things that really isn't important to us. So we need to select carefully. We need to get out into nature. Nature is really critical in helping our brains focus and work better. It improves our attention, working memory, impulse control, and restores balance in the brain. Note yourself how better you feel when you are walking or hiking or running. And it's science. I'm not a tree hugger. I'm just saying this is all stuff that's been well researched. Children should be outside as much as possible, and it improves their attention, memory, impulse control, and it calms the brain. It makes them more intelligent, in other words. Again, this is science speaking. Promoting brain function again and well-being. Avoid multitasking. You will achieve less, and don't fool yourself. Exercise is really important for the brain. It improves blood flow to the frontal lobes. It produces a thing called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which really helps with learning and plasticity in the brain. Allow time for daydreaming, playing, listening to music, taking a nap, looking at art, having a hot bath, and especially plenty of laughter. Have plenty breaks from screens. Those of us that have to work on them a lot, we should have regular short breaks rather than long occasional ones. Keep your mobile out of sight, turned off, so it is a conscious decision to use it. And beware of profit-driven advice when it comes to these devices. Set clear limits at home for screens for yourself or your children. Put screens away before bedtime. Create screen-free zones. There shouldn't be any screens in a bedroom. And that comes up again. We could talk about that all day, the science behind that. It's really important, especially for children, and that includes their phones. Shouldn't be in their bedroom. Think long-term goals and teach your children to do the same. Set a good example for your children. Children learn by observation. And unfortunately, sometimes that's not always consoling when you think about how you could have been observed better, but you'd rather that than that. Sleep is really important for attention, memory, mood, and thinking, so make sure you and your children are getting enough sleep, and screens do interfere with sleep. For optimal brain and emotional development, children need human connection. So you can ask yourselves, what do your children need? They don't need screens. They need human connection. They need food, they need shelter, they need love. They don't need, if you think of the word need, they don't need screens, or at least not at a young age. Going back to this one from earlier, awareness, don't be hooked, think. They say it's hard to get someone to stop something using a product that they use without thinking. Well, think, don't be manipulated by these very clever people. Introspection, be aware of your impulses and your thoughts. Well-being and human connection. This is an important slide. Face-to-face connection produces a thing called oxytocin in the brain. Trust, friendship, kindness, empathy, compassion, warmth, and respect we get from face-to-face connection. It's vital, and it produces a thing called oxytocin, which reduces fear, anxiety, promotes brain function, and even improves length of life. It's essential for mental stability and boosts your well-being. And if someone were to say to you when you're buying your child or yourself a smartphone, if this came on the box, I'm wondering how you would feel. So this is a summary, and it's also a warning. It may be addictive, it may cause attention deficit, may cause memory impairment, may have negative effect on school performance for children, may have negative effect on mental well-being, may cause obesity, may cause aggressive behavior, may contribute to undeveloped social and emotional skills, may decrease self-regulation, may cause learning difficulties, may delay development, may reduce parent-child contact, may provide access to inappropriate material, which we haven't even touched on, such as violence and pornography. So you ask yourself, would I hand this over without thinking to my child? So look after your brain is the final message, and thank you.